He lived alone on the edge of the valley, where the mountains met the plains. The ranch was vast and quiet, stretching far beyond what the eye could see, and the only sounds were the wind through the trees and the lowing of cattle he had been working the land since he was a boy, learning from his father and his grandfather how to care for the animals in the soil, how to read the weather, and how to endure the long days that seemed to never end. Even though life was hard, he found comfort in the rhythm of work and the way each day built upon the last, and in the small victories like a calf that had survived a storm or a fence that had been repaired. Just in time, he had learned to be careful about the people he let into his life. There were many in town who would talk or spread rumors, and he had no patience for gossip. He liked things simple and straightforward. The ranch was his sanctuary, and he intended to keep it that way. But one morning, everything began to shift when a young woman arrived in the valley. She had come from a distant place, seeking work and a fresh start. She was strong and confident, but there was a fragility in the way. She carried herself like she had seen more than her share of trouble the first time they met. She had been walking along the dirt road leading to the ranch, when a wagon had slipped, and she had stumbled. She had not fallen hard, but enough to draw attention. He had been nearby checking the fences and had watched her carefully. She did not call for help, and she quickly righted herself, brushing the dust off her clothes. He felt a curiosity stir within him. He had not seen her before, but there was something about the way she moved, something steady yet cautious, that made him watch over. The next few days, he noticed her at the farm where she had started working. She was polite and diligent, and there was a light in her eyes that spoke of determination. He respected that, because he knew how hard it could be to start over in a place where no one knew you. He saw the way she endured the long hours in the sun, and the way she did not complain when the work was difficult. He also saw the way some men in the town looked at her with smirks and comments that made him tighten his ears. Jahi did not know her name yet, but he found himself thinking about her when he walked the fields in the early morning, or when he fixed a broken fence in the fading light of day. He wondered if she noticed the way he had watched over her from a distance, if she realized that someone was there paying attention, if she ever felt alone. One afternoon, he was repairing a section of the corral when he heard raised voices from the road leading to the farm. He looked up and saw two men arguing with the young woman. They were taller and older, and the way they leaned toward her with hands raised in gestures of intimidation made his chest tighten. He walked closer, not because he wanted to fight, but because he could not stand to see her face strained with fear. The young woman held her ground as best she could and spoke in a firm voice, but there was a tremor in her tone that betrayed how scared she felt. He stepped into the clearing, and his presence made the men pause. They knew him by sight, because he was known in the valley for being fair but strict. They muttered something under their breath and left quickly without another word, leaving her standing there with her hands on her hips trying to steady her breathing. She turned to him and nodded in thanks, and he nodded back. His eyes told her that she was not alone and that she could rely on him. If things became worse, he did not speak much because he preferred to show rather than tell, but there was a quiet strength in his gaze that gave her reassurance. She felt a flicker of relief that someone cared, that someone was willing to stand by her even without knowing Heron. The following weeks, he watched over her in subtle ways, making sure the paths she took to work were clear and safe, checking the outskirts of the property for any sign of trouble. He did not interfere in her life beyond what was necessary, but he made his presence known in the ways a guardian might without drawing attention to himself. The young woman began to notice the small gestures, the way the barn doors were always unlocked, and how someone had mended the fence along the path she took. Never saw him up close when he did it, but she felt the effect of his watchful eye. She began to open up to the valley, slowly sharing bits of her past with the few people she trusted and showing a kind heart to the animals and the elderly neighbors who needed help with chores. He observed from a distance, always careful not to intrude, but always aware. He learned that she had come from a difficult situation and that she had left because she wanted freedom from control and fear. She was determined to make a new life for herself, and he respected that determination more than he could express. The men who had harassed her did not stop entirely, and that made him tense, but he never acted rashly. He wanted to make sure that when he confronted them, it would be effective and decisive. He knew that impulsive actions could make things worse, and he had learned from experience that patience and strategy were more powerful than anger alone. He continued his routine on the ranch, but there was a new edge to his thoughts, a need to protect someone who had earned his respect and trust without asking for it. Sometimes he would walk past the barn and see her feeding the animals or stacking hay, and he felt a strange sense of pride. Mixed with concern, he wondered if she knew how strong she was, and if she realized that even quiet acts of courage could inspire respect and protection. He could see that her strength was not just in her physical ability, but in her character in the way she refused to back down in the face of intimidation. One evening, as the sun dipped below the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, he sat on the porch of the ranch house thinking about how life could change in an instant. He thought about how he had spent years alone, content in routine, and how a single person could shift the balance of his world without even realizing it. He knew that things would not always be simple, and that the challenges she faced were real, but he also knew that he could not ignore them. It was a slow burn of understanding and connection that did not need words. He felt a responsibility to act if necessary, and a hope that the young woman would continue to thrive despite the dangers that lurked nearby. He had learned that life demanded both courage and patience, and that sometimes the strongest protection came from the most unexpected place. As night fell and the stars appeared one by one, he continued his watch over the valley, aware of the quiet beauty of the land and the fragile, fertile balance of life within it. He knew that tomorrow could bring another challenge, another test of patience and strength, but he was ready. He had seen the strength in the young woman and in himself, and he would not let either be broken. The wind whispered through the trees and carried the faint sounds of the town below, but here on the ranch there was a stillness that allowed thought and observation to flow freely. He felt a connection to the land and to the people who inhabited it, a sense that even in solitude one could be deeply intertwined with the lives around them. He felt that the presence of the young woman had brought something unexpected into his world, something that would test him, change him in ways he could not yet fully understand. The nights passed quietly, but he remained vigilant. He knew that the peace of the ranch could not be taken for granted, and that life often brought unforeseen trials. He had faced many hardships before, but the uncertainty of protecting another human being brought with it a new kind of tension, a weight that was both uncomfortable and necessary through all of this. He never forced himself into the young woman's life, but allowed his presence to be known in subtle ways. He wanted her to feel safe without feeling constrained, and to know that someone was looking out for her without needing to claim credit. She had started to sense it, and she felt a quiet gratitude that did not need to be spoken in. So the days continued in a rhythm that blended work, observation, and silent protection. The rancher found a renewed purpose in the routine, and the young woman began to flourish in her new environment. Both were aware of the dangers that lingered, but also of the strength that resided within them, and the quiet bond that was growing between them. Without the need for words or declarations, the valley stretched wide and open before them, full of beauty, challenges, and life yet to be fully understood and embraced. The young woman was settling into her new routine at the farm. She had grown accustomed to the long hours and the physical demands of the work, but she could not shake the memory of the men who had harassed her. The way they had leered and spoken had left a mark, a small shadow of fear that she tried to push aside. Each day she focused on her chores and the animals and on learning the ways of the valley, but there was a tension in the air that she could not ignore. The rancher continued his quiet watch. He saw the way she flinched at sudden noises, and the way she glanced over her shoulder when she walked alone. He knew that the men might return, or that others could take advantage of her in a place where strangers were not always welcome. He could feel a weight building in his chest, a need to step in, not just from concern, but from a sense of justice that had guided him all his life. One afternoon he noticed shadows moving along the edge of the property. A group of men were laughing and throwing small stones toward the farm. She stood her ground at first, but when one of them aimed closer, she stumbled back in alarm. Her hands shook slightly, and the rancher felt a surge of anger that he struggled to keep in check. He moved quietly across the field, not to be seen at first, but to position himself so that if things escalated, he would be ready. The young woman tried to speak to them, but her voice wavered. The men were not used to being challenged, and they stepped closer. Their words were cruel and meant to provoke fear. She raised her hands as if to protect herself, and the rancher stepped forward. The sight of him made the men pause. They recognized his presence, and the way he carried himself was not threatening, but firm. There was an unspoken warning in his gaze. They muttered among themselves and eventually left, muttering threats that would not go unheard. Young woman exhaled deeply, feeling a mix of relief and lingering fear. She looked toward the rancher, and he nodded simply, indicating that she was safe for now. His eyes were calm, but they held a promise that he would not allow harm to come to her. While he could prevent it over the next days, he continued to monitor the situation. From a distance, he watched the roads she took to work and the edges of the town where trouble might arise. He spoke with a few trustworthy neighbors, quietly asking about any unusual activity without revealing too much about his concern. He wanted to be certain that when intervention was needed, it would be effective and not reckless. The young woman began noticing small changes. The path she walked was clear of debris and obstacles. She found that fences were repaired when needed, and the barn doors were always functional. These subtle actions comforted her. She did not know who was responsible, but she felt a sense of safety that allowed her to focus more fully on her work and on building a life in the valley. She began to trust the environment around her, even while knowing that danger had not vanished. One evening, she was walking home from the farm. When she sensed movement behind her, she turned slightly and saw a man lurking near the road. He had been following her from the town, and she felt panic rise in her chest. She tried to keep calm and quickened her pace, but the man matched her speed, mocking her attempts to flee. He reached out toward her, but at that moment the rancher appeared seemingly out of nowhere. His presence was solid and commanding, and the man froze. He did not expect someone to intervene so quickly, and he could see from the rancher's stance that there would be consequences if he moved closer. The rancher spoke in a low voice that carried authority. There was no anger in his words, just a firm warning that made the man hesitate. He stepped forward slightly, making it clear that any further action would be met immediately. The man cursed under his breath and fled down the road, leaving the young woman standing with her heart pounding. She felt both relief and awe at the calm strength of the rancher. She realized that he had been watching over her in ways she had not fully understood. In the following weeks, she grew more confident. She continued to work at the farm and interact with the locals. She smiled more freely and carried herself with a quiet strength that made her presence known without drawing unnecessary attention. Yet she remained cautious and aware that threats could return at any time. The rancher continued to maintain a protective distance, allowing her autonomy. While being ready to step in when needed, he observed her interactions with others and noted the kindness she showed to animals and neighbors alike. He admired her resilience and the way she refused to let fear dominate her actions. He thought about his own life on the ranch, the solitude he had long accepted, and how her arrival had shifted the balance of his days. He felt a growing sense of responsibility, not only to protect her, but to understand and respect the person she was becoming. One afternoon, a neighbor approached him quietly, mentioning that the men who had caused trouble might return. They had been seen gathering further down the road and were talking among themselves with ill intent. The rancher listened carefully and made plans to be present along the path she would take, ensuring that she remained safe. He knew that confrontation might be inevitable, but he wanted to be prepared so that the outcome would be controlled, and just he also began reinforcing the ranch itself, checking fences and gates, ensuring that the boundaries were secure and clear. He worked quietly, but deliberately, knowing that small details could prevent larger problems. He continued his routine on the land, balancing daily chores with observation and protection. This dual focus gave him purpose and allowed him to channel the tension into constructive action rather than fear or anger. Young woman began to notice that she could move through her day with less anxiety. She felt safer walking the roads and more confident interacting with the locals. The presence of the rancher was subtle, yet effective. She could not always see him, but she felt the effect of his vigilance, and this knowledge allowed her to build a sense of freedom and trust. She started planning for her future, thinking about opportunities beyond the farm and ways to make her life her own. Despite these improvements, the tension in the valley remained. He knew that life could shift quickly and that complacency could be dangerous. He remained vigilant, watching for signs of trouble and ready to act if necessary, he also understood that his actions had to be measured. He could not allow anger to dictate his decisions. He had to maintain control to ensure that protection was effective and that no unnecessary harm came to anyone. The young woman had moments of reflection herself, thinking about the challenges she had faced and the quiet support she felt from the rancher. She realized that courage could take many forms, from the quiet resolve to stand against intimidation to the visible presence of someone willing to act in your defense. She felt gratitude and a developing respect for the man who had entered her life in a way that neither forced nor overpowered, but simply safeguarded. He watched her one afternoon as she tended the animals, her movements confident and assured. Her focus was complete, and there was a light in her eyes that reflected determination and growth. He felt a quiet satisfaction knowing that his efforts were helping her gain strength, not just physical, but emotional and mental. He knew that real protection was about more than keeping danger away. It was about fostering confidence and resilience. The days blended into weeks, and the small town began to notice her quiet strength. The men who had harassed her started to avoid confrontation, knowing that she was no longer an easy target. Their attempts at intimidation dwindled as her confidence and the rancher's watchful presence created an unspoken barrier. She felt a growing sense of belonging in the valley and began to consider the long-term possibilities for herself in this new home. Evenings on the ranch continued to bring reflection. He would sit quietly on the porch watching the sun dip behind the mountains. Thinking about the events of the day, he considered the balance between freedom and safety, between intervention and patience. He understood that life in the valley was complex, and that protection and trust had to coexist in harmony. He felt a quiet pride in the role he played and a cautious optimism for the days to come, knowing that challenges could arise, but could also be met with strength and integrity. The valley had grown quiet after weeks of careful observation, but the rancher knew that danger never truly disappeared. The young woman had become more confident walking through town and tending the animals. Yet he could see the strain in her posture. When she passed the men who had once harassed her, he continued to follow at a distance, ensuring that she remained safe while allowing her independence to grow. One afternoon, the tension came to a head. The young woman was walking along the dirt road to the farm when the same men who had caused trouble before appeared, blocking her path. She tried to step aside and continue, but one of them grabbed her arm firmly. His grip meant to intimidate. She pulled back quickly, trying to free herself, and shouted, but there was no one close enough to hear. The rancher had been checking the fences nearby and noticed the commotion. He ran across the open field, moving fast and determined. He did not think about confrontation, only about protecting the woman who had come to mean more to him than he could explain. His heart beat quickly as he approached the scene, and he saw the fear in her eyes as well as the challenge in the faces of the men. He stepped into the road, and his presence immediately changed the dynamic. The men recognized him, and a tense silence fell over the space. They had heard of his reputation, and they could see the quiet authority in the way he stood. His gaze met theirs, steady and unwavering. He spoke in a low voice, calm but firm, warning them to release her and step aside. The words carried more weight than threats could have. The men hesitated and muttered among themselves, were taken aback by the sudden intervention, and unsure if they should test him. They let go of the young woman and stepped back a few paces. She exhaled quickly and adjusted her footing while keeping her eyes on the men as well. The rancher moved closer, subtly ensuring that she had space to step away from danger. One of the men tried to make a sarcastic comment, but the rancher's voice cut through the air once again, warning them that any further action would have consequences. They glanced at each other, realizing that the man in front of them was not one to bluff. They muttered a few words and turned away, leaving the woman standing on the road, still shaking, but unharmed. The rancher stayed nearby until they were out of sight. He spoke softly to her, reassuring her that she was safe for now, and that he would always watch over her if needed. She nodded slowly, grateful for the intervention, but also feeling a sense of pride that she had not been passive in the situation. Her courage had mattered, and his presence had been the final protection she needed. Over the following days, he made sure the areas she traveled were safe, He checked the roads early in the morning and in the evening, making sure there were no hidden threats or obstacles. The young woman noticed that she could walk more freely and that the tension she had carried began to ease. She could feel a new confidence rising within her, knowing that someone was looking out for her. Without imposing or controlling her life, the rancher also began to reflect on his own emotions. He had spent years in solitude and thought he was content alone, yet he realized that he had developed a protective attachment. He cared deeply for her safety and well-being more than he had anticipated. He did not speak of it to anyone, and did not need to. He understood the responsibility he had taken on, and he was determined to act wisely and with restraint. Evening, a neighbor mentioned that the men might attempt to return. They had been seen in town, and rumors of their intentions began to circulate. The rancher quietly prepared, ensuring that if they did come back, he would be ready, and the woman would not face them alone. He reinforced fences and gates and made sure there were no easy paths for anyone to approach her unnoticed. The young woman continued to work and build her life. She grew stronger with each passing day, tending animals, repairing fences, and helping the elderly neighbors with their chores. She had learned to rely on her own instincts and judgment, yet she also felt comforted knowing that the rancher was nearby. If he appeared at the right time, it could mean the difference between danger and safety. One day, as she was moving a load of hay, a shadow approached from the trees. She froze, sensing movement that was not usual. The rancher was there, quickly assessing the situation. His eyes scanned the edges of the field, noting the figures in the distance. They were not friendly, and it was clear they had ill intent. He stepped forward, positioning himself between the young woman and the threat. The men tried to intimidate him with words, but he remained calm and steady. His presence alone conveyed a warning stronger than any threat they could utter. They looked at each other, realizing that confrontation was not in their favor. They muttered curses under their breath and left the field, giving way to the calm the rancher brought with him. The young woman watched silently, feeling a mix of relief and admiration. She had seen his strength before, but now she understood the depth of it. The ability to remain calm under pressure and act decisively had made all the difference. She realized that protection could be powerful without needing to dominate, and that courage could be silent yet unyielding. In the following weeks, the valley seemed quieter, though the rancher remained vigilant. He understood that peace was temporary and that threats could arise at any time. He continued his routine of work, observation, and subtle protection, ensuring that the young woman had the freedom to live her life without fear and the confidence to trust in her own abilities. The young woman began to notice small changes in herself. She moved with more confidence and spoke with a steadier voice when interacting with neighbors. She had a growing sense of belonging and felt that the valley could be a home. She thought about her journey from the difficult past she had left behind and realized that she was gaining not just safety, but a new sense of strength and hope. The rancher observed all of this from a distance, quietly satisfied. He knew that his role was not just to prevent harm, but to allow her to thrive. He continued to watch the edges of the valley and the roads she traveled, knowing that vigilance and preparation were essential. His quiet determination created a protective web that allowed life to proceed with reduced fear and increased aid. Opportunity for growth. Evenings on the ranch were reflective times. He watched the sunset behind the mountains, considering the challenges that had passed and the ones that might come. He understood that real courage involved endurance, patience, and careful action. He thought about the quiet bond forming between himself and the young woman, a connection built on respect, trust, and shared experience rather than words or declarations. The days merged into a rhythm of work, observation, and preparation. The young woman felt safer and more confident, and the rancher felt a renewed sense of purpose in his solitary life. He had acted decisively when needed and had allowed space for growth and independence. He understood that real protection was not domination, but support, and that courage could be expressed quietly and powerfully at the right time. The valley remained a place of beauty and challenges. The wind moved through the trees, carrying the sounds of life and work. The young woman continued to grow stronger, and the rancher remained a vigilant presence, ensuring that the balance between freedom and safety was maintained, and that life could move forward with courage and integrity. After the confrontation, the valley felt a cautious calm. The young woman went about her days tending animals and working at the farm, but she carried a new awareness. Of the fragility of safety, she had felt fear before, but now she also understood the power of standing strong and the importance of having someone who could intervene when needed. The rancher remained nearby, quiet and observant, giving her space, yet ready to act if necessary. Word of the incident spread through the town. The men who had caused trouble faced consequences, though not immediately. Everyone had seen the seriousness of the situation, and it was clear that further harassment would not be tolerated. The local community began to respect the young woman more as they saw her courage and determination. They also understood the strength of the rancher, who had acted decisively to prevent harm. The young woman felt a mixture of relief. In reflection, she knew that danger could still exist, but the immediate threat had been removed. She considered her own actions and realized that her courage had mattered, and that the support of the rancher had been critical. She began to feel empowered by the idea that she could face challenges and that she was not alone in the world. Rancher continued to check the paths and fences around the farm. He spoke with neighbors quietly to gather information about any suspicious activity. Without revealing too much about his concern, he understood that control and patience were important, and that rash action could make situations worse. He preferred to be prepared and observant, so that when intervention was needed, it would be measured and effective. The young woman also began noticing subtle changes in the valley. She could walk more freely and interact with locals with greater confidence. The respect she had gained from the community allowed her to feel less isolated. She began helping neighbors with tasks that required more than one person, and discovered that her presence and actions could inspire others. Her courage became a quiet example to those around her. One afternoon, she was approached by a local official who spoke kindly about her resilience and assured her that the authorities were aware of the men who had caused trouble and would ensure their actions were addressed. She felt a sense of reassurance, knowing that the situation was being taken seriously. Beyond the immediate protection of the rancher, she understood that justice was not only personal, but also communal, and that the law could support her right to safety. The rancher observed these developments. Silently, he knew that his role had been important, but he also recognized that real justice came through balance and appropriate consequences. He did not need recognition for what he had done, yet he felt a quiet satisfaction knowing that the young woman was beginning to feel secure and respected. In her new home, the men who had caused trouble were watched closely, and when further attempts at intimidation were discovered, they faced action from the local authorities. They were warned and monitored, and their ability to harm others diminished. The young woman saw the results of these actions and understood that standing up and seeking help when needed could bring change. She felt empowered and more confident in her ability to navigate the world around her. Life on the ranch and at the farm returned to a more normal rhythm. The young woman continued to care for animals, work in the fields, and assist neighbors. She also began to consider future plans that had once seemed impossible. Now she could envision stability, growth, and even personal goals that would allow her to thrive. The rancher continued his quiet observation, providing reassurance and subtle support without intruding on her autonomy. Over time, the valley became a safer place for her. She could walk the roads without fear, glance at neighbors with confidence, and interact with the community with respect and trust. She had learned that courage could take many forms, from physical standing up to verbal boundaries and to seeking support when necessary. She realized that personal strength and communal support could coexist to provide both protection and freedom. The rancher reflected on the events that had passed. He knew that the immediate threat had been neutralized, but vigilance was still required. He continued to check fences, paths, and roads, and remained ready to intervene if new danger appeared. He understood that safety was not permanent, and that responsibility required endurance, awareness, and calm action. The young woman felt gratitude and a growing sense of independence. She could acknowledge the protection she had received, while also recognizing her own ability to respond to challenges. She had grown in confidence, skill, and resilience. She began to see herself not as someone who needed saving, but as someone capable of making choices and contributing to her community, while still having support when necessary. Evenings on the ranch were times of reflection for both of them. The rancher watched the sun set behind the mountains, Considering the lessons learned about courage, patience, and responsibility, he understood that the balance between intervention and autonomy was delicate, and that protection could be powerful without being controlling. The young woman reflected on her own growth, considering the journey from fear to confidence and the importance of allies in navigating life. The community around them also shifted slowly in response to these events. People began to see the importance of supporting one another, of standing up to harassment, and of respecting those who displayed courage and integrity. The young woman became part of this quiet change, influencing others by example, and the rancher continued his steady presence as both protector and observer. The valley continued to offer both beauty and challenges. The work on the ranch went on, and life moved forward with a renewed sense of respect for courage, responsibility, and justice. The young woman could pursue her goals with greater freedom, and the rancher found purpose in his role without needing recognition or reward. The bond between them deepened, subtly built on trust, respect, and shared experience rather than words or declarations. They had faced danger together and emerged stronger. Both had learned lessons about strength, patience, and the importance of supporting one another. Life in the valley would continue to bring challenges, but they had shown that careful action and quiet courage could provide protection and allow growth and resilience to flourish. The rancher and the young woman moved forward, aware of the responsibilities they shared and the possibilities that lay ahead. The valley had settled into a gentle rhythm. The young woman continued her work at the farm, and her days were filled with the routine of care for animals, repair of fences, and tending the fields. She moved with confidence and purpose, and the quiet respect of the neighbors followed her. She felt stronger than she had before, knowing that she could rely on herself and also trust in the support she had received. When danger arose, the rancher remained nearby. Observing from a distance, he continued his daily routines on the land, repairing fences, checking paths, and keeping an eye on the roads. He did not interfere unnecessarily, but his presence was felt in the subtle ways that made life safer. He understood that protection was not about control, but about allowing life to proceed with less fear and more opportunity for growth. The young woman began to embrace a new sense of possibility. She thought about the future in ways that she had not considered before. She could pursue goals that had seemed impossible and imagine a life where she could thrive without constant worry. The valley became a place not just of work, but of hope, a home that offered both challenge and comfort. One afternoon, she walked through the fields and paused to watch the sunset. The light touched the mountains and the plains, casting everything in a soft glow. She felt a sense of peace, knowing that the valley was her home and that she had overcome the challenges she faced. She also felt gratitude for the quiet support of the rancher, whose actions had made a real difference in her life. The rancher continued his quiet observation. He noted the changes in her demeanor, the way she moved with confidence, and the way she interacted with the community. He felt a sense of fulfillment, knowing that his efforts to protect her had allowed her to grow, not just in safety, but in strength and character. He understood that his role was not to shape her life, but to ensure that she could shape it for herself. Without unnecessary fear, the days continued with the rhythm of work and quiet reflection. She helped neighbors who needed assistance, mended fences, and cared for animals. She also began to plan for personal projects that had long been in her mind. Ideas for expanding her skills and contributing to the community filled her thoughts. She realized that freedom was not just physical but emotional and mental, and she was learning to claim it fully. Rancher observed all of this quietly. He knew that the challenges they had faced had changed both of them. He had learned patience and vigilance, and a new kind of responsibility. While she had learned courage, resilience, and the importance of allies, the bond between them had grown strong without words, a connection of trust and respect built on shared experience and understanding. The local community began to recognize her strength. She was seen as capable and courageous, and people sought her advice or assistance. She had earned their respect through both her actions and the quiet dignity with which she faced adversity. The rancher felt satisfaction in seeing her recognized not for the protection he had given, but for the character she displayed. On her own evenings on the ranch were reflective times for both of them. The rancher watched the sunset from the porch of the house, thinking about how life had changed since the young woman arrived. He considered the lessons learned about courage, patience, and the importance of careful action. He understood that protection involved responsibility and that strength could be quiet and subtle, yet effective. The young woman also spent evenings in reflection. She considered the journey she had taken from fear to confidence. She thought about the dangers she had faced and the moments of courage she had discovered within herself. She felt gratitude for the support she had received and a deep sense of pride in her own ability to meet challenges and continue moving forward. As weeks turned into months, the valley became more peaceful. The men who had once threatened her had left the area or had been confronted with consequences, ensuring that their ability to cause harm was diminished. She felt a growing sense of security and could focus on building her life without fear. The rancher remained vigilant, yet unobtrusive, his presence a quiet reassurance. The young woman began forming deeper connections with the community. She helped neighbors with work that required more than one person, shared stories and advice, and became a figure of quiet inspiration. Her confidence allowed her to take on responsibilities she had once thought beyond her reach, and her calm strength encouraged others to act with courage in their own lives. Rancher continued to work the land and maintain the ranch. He felt contentment in his role as protector and observer, knowing that he had allowed her freedom while also ensuring safety. He understood that his actions had consequences, not just in protection but in fostering confidence and growth. He had found purpose in a life that had once been defined by solitude. One afternoon, the young woman and the rancher walked along the edge of the valley together. She spoke of her hopes and plans, and he listened quietly, offering guidance. Only when asked, she felt a sense of partnership built on mutual respect and understanding. They did not need words to express the bond between them. It was understood in shared experiences and the quiet knowledge of support and trust. The valley continued to offer both beauty and challenge, but the young woman felt ready to face them. She had grown stronger, resilient, and confident. She had learned the value of courage, patience, and support, and the importance of standing up for herself when necessary. The rancher felt pride in her growth and in the way she had embraced her life and opportunities. Evenings brought reflection on the changes and lessons learned. Both understood that life would continue to bring challenges, yet they were ready. The rancher remained vigilant and steady, and the young woman moved forward with confidence and hope. Their shared experiences had shaped a bond of respect, trust, and understanding that would endure. Even as life continued to evolve, the valley had become a place of possibility and growth for both of them. The young woman thrived in her work and in the community, and the rancher found renewed purpose in his quiet vigilance and care. Their lives intertwined in a way that allowed freedom and protection, courage, and growth to coexist. The story of their journey was not one of drama or spectacle, but of real human resilience and the quiet power of caring for another. As the sun set each evening, the valley was bathed in soft light, reflecting the peace and strength that had grown there. The young woman felt secure, capable, and hopeful for the future. The rancher felt satisfaction, contentment, and purpose, knowing that his actions had allowed life to flourish and that courage, trust, and quiet vigilance had created a lasting impact in both their lives. They continued their days with work, reflection, and quiet appreciation for the life they had built and the lessons they had learned together. Time moved steadily in the valley. The young woman had settled into a rhythm that brought both purpose and comfort. She continued her work on the farm, tending animals, repairing fences, and helping neighbors. She moved with confidence and calm, a presence that reflected the growth and courage she had developed over the months. She no longer felt the constant tension that had marked her early days in the valley, yet she remained aware that life could present challenges. At any time, the rancher continued his quiet vigilance. He walked the fields, checked the fences, and observed the roads, knowing that safety was built on awareness and preparation. He did not intrude on her life, but his presence was felt in subtle ways, allowing her freedom to move while providing a steady source of protection. He understood that real care meant allowing others to grow while being ready to act. If danger appeared one morning as the sun rose over the mountains, the young woman noticed new activity in the valley. A small group of people had come to the area seeking work and guidance. She welcomed them with a kind and confident presence, helping them find work and teaching them about the routines of life on the land. Her willingness to assist others reflected the resilience she had built and the quiet leadership she had developed from her own experiences. The rancher observed her interactions quietly, noting how she had grown into a figure of reliability and strength. The trust and respect she commanded from others was not forced or loud, but earned through consistent action and integrity. He felt a quiet pride in seeing her develop into someone capable of making a meaningful difference in the lives around Hertha. Valley itself became busier, yet still retained its peaceful rhythm. The animals were cared for, the fields tended, and the community began to operate with a sense of cooperation and mutual support. The young woman played a central role in this subtle transformation, guiding newcomers and offering assistance when needed. She had learned that courage and patience were not only personal virtues, but tools to help shape the world around her. One afternoon, as she was walking along the edge of the property, she noticed signs of danger. One of the men who had previously caused trouble had returned, seeking to provoke fear. She felt a small flicker of anxiety, but quickly reminded herself of the strength she now possessed. She took a deep breath and prepared to act with calm determination while remaining aware that help could arrive if necessary. The rancher appeared without hesitation, positioning himself between her and the approaching threat. His presence was steady and commanding, making it clear that any further action would be met with immediate consequences. The man faltered, recognizing the seriousness in his eyes and the certainty in his stance. He tried to speak, but the rancher's voice cut through firmly, warning him to leave. The man hesitated and then retreated, understanding that confrontation was not in his favor. The young woman felt a mix of relief and pride. She realized that her courage had helped guide her actions, and that the rancher's support was always ready when needed. She had grown strong enough to face challenges with composure, and yet wise enough to value the assistance of a steady ally. Her experiences had taught her that strength could coexist with trust and cooperation. Over the following weeks, the valley saw continued growth and harmony. The young woman continued to develop her skills and assist others. She helped establish routines for newcomers and shared her experiences about courage, resilience, and careful observation. She became a source of guidance without dominating or controlling, providing a model of balanced leadership based on respect and understanding. Rancher maintained his watchful presence, ensuring that the environment remained safe while allowing the young woman and others the freedom to act and make decisions. He had learned that protection was not about control, but about creating space for growth and confidence. His role was quiet yet essential, and he found purpose and fulfillment in seeing the lives around him flourish. As the seasons changed, the young woman took on new responsibilities. She organized small community projects, helped repair structures damaged by weather, and ensured that the animals were well cared for during harsher days. Her confidence and competence became widely recognized, and her sense of security allowed her to plan and dream for the future with a clarity she had never known. The rancher observed her quietly, appreciating the transformation he had witnessed her journey from fear to strength, from uncertainty to quiet leadership. He felt a deep sense of satisfaction, knowing that his guidance and protection had allowed her to flourish without overshadowing her independence or determination. He continued to act with discretion, providing reassurance without interfering unnecessarily. One evening, the young woman and the rancher walked together along the valley edge. The air was cool, and the sky painted in soft hues from the setting sun. She spoke of her plans and hopes, and he listened, offering subtle guidance when asked. She felt a deep connection with him, built on trust, understanding, and shared experience. They did not need words to convey the bond that had formed. It was understood in their actions and presence. Life in the valley continued to blend work, community, and personal growth. The young woman thrived in her environment, using her courage and patience to influence others positively. She had learned that strength was not only about facing danger, but also about guiding and supporting those around her. The rancher continued his vigilance, knowing that his quiet care had contributed to a stronger and safer community over time. The valley became a place of opportunity and resilience. The young woman and The rancher had both grown through shared experience and mutual understanding. She could navigate life confidently, take on responsibilities beyond what she had imagined, while he found fulfillment in the quiet satisfaction of protection and support. Their presence influenced the community and created an environment where courage, patience, and cooperation could thrive. Evenings were often spent in reflection. The young woman considered the journey she had taken from fear to empowerment and the lessons she had learned about patience, courage, and trust. The rancher reflected on the changes and the growth he had witnessed, appreciating the quiet but powerful transformation that had occurred in both their lives. They understood that life in the valley would continue to bring challenges, but they were prepared to meet them with strength, wisdom, and care. The valley itself seemed to embody the changes that had taken place. Peace, growth, and resilience were visible in the work on the land, the care of the animals, and the interactions within the community. The young woman thrived in her work and leadership, and the rancher continued his quiet vigilance. Their shared journey had created a life of balance and purpose built on respect, courage, and the quiet power of human connection through it all. The bond between the young woman and the rancher remained strong. It was a connection not defined by words or declarations, but by trust, shared experience, and the understanding that they could face challenges together. The valley became not only a home, but a testament to growth, courage, and the enduring power of care and vigilance in shaping a safer and more meaningful life for all who lived there.